Another change of pace today with a more serene and distant scene, which allows us to explore the challenge of aerial perspective and a softer colour palette. Previously, I have mentioned working with your own painting to allow it to speak to you as you go and give direction towards the end result. This is an essential way of painting with watercolours because the paint and the water won't always be told what they're to do. They enjoy having a say too. Wet in wet technique will be one of the main ways to depict the trees within the plane. This gives the softness required for them to appear naturally distant. In contrast, the trees and bushes toward the front will have the appearance of much more detail. But this is an illusion, because as they group together, lost and found edges play their part within the tonal variations of this part of the painting. Let's get started. Tonight, welcome everyone again, and tonight we're doing a landscape, some trees in the foreground and some trees in the background. The ones of course in the background you can barely see, but that's okay. What I wanted to talk about first is format and also printing photos, because sometimes printing photos can be different. Now I do because I send my photos through to you, you get to print your own, and sometimes things go a little bit AWOL. But that's okay because we can work with that anyway. The main difference here is firstly there's a colour change. You can see how one's much more blue, this one's gone a little bit more violet-y. It's a colour thing, it's not that big a deal. We get to choose our own colours anyway, so if you wanted to go into the more violet because you like the look of it, fine. If you want to brighten it up and go a bit more blue, also fine. The other main difference between these two is that one has been cropped. Now this is the reference that I sent through, and you can see how there's extra trees on this side, and we probably have finished about here on this one, because as in the wisdom of all of these computers, they decide they want to do something different unless you tell them. Sometimes their default modes are not exactly what we want. So it's something to be aware of. With this particular reference, both of these will actually work okay. I like the extra distance area that one does have, but at the same time, this one would still work anyway. Now the main difference here is formatting. I'm just going to show you how to format. I think I have done this before, but it never hurts to recap anyway. And I'll show you exactly how this works with different formats on the same painting. Well, the same reference, I should say. And so that one there finishes about there. So if we were to use exactly the same format as that, we would be finishing our painting almost the same size as what the piece of paper is. And that's okay. I wouldn't even bother changing it. I'd happily use the full surface. The difference is when we do it with the reference that was not cropped, and I do the same thing. We're putting it through the diagonals and just extending that because we're going to assume that that's somewhere about there. So what this does is actually proportionately shorten our page so that the area of surface is going to be compatible. That is probably, like I said, it's probably my preference. So what I'm going to do is put this upside down because I've meant to do it the other way around. I'll take it off this way. And I'm going to bring my tape up so that it finishes around about there. Bit of give and take doesn't really make any difference. Because it's a landscape, they can be fairly forgiving. And so we're going to do it that way. So thank you for that. Now, since I have done an example, I'll just talk quickly about that, because you will see that what I have done as an example is quite different to the actual photo in many ways, but not entirely. The main thing that's different is that this section of trees here in the foreground is much smaller, and I've totally left out that big one. The reason is I love that distance. I really wanted it to be about the distance, and I wanted to have it be like, oh, okay, we're standing on a bit of a rise looking down into the valley. And so that's what I was aiming for. I've used suggestions of what's happening in here, and I've then gone through and done the painting as is. The other thing that's slightly different is how much distance is here compared to what you see in the photo. Now, I don't know whether something I've really been noticing when I've taken these photos is that what I see actually equates more to that, and the camera seems to squish it this way for some reason. And so a lot of these things, it's much better if you take your own photos, because that way you actually remember as well as just relying on what's happening in your photo, in your reference. And of course I would have cropped this a bit later on to make it something that I often crop them to make them be the nicest part of that photo. So as it is, I'm going to work with this, and I'm going to use this as my example to, and I'm sure I'll end up with it exactly the same painting. Yeah, no, I can guarantee you I won't. So, first things first, of course, we need to mix up some paint. We need to talk about what paint we're going to use, what colours, and all that sort of thing. So I like the idea that there's a bit of blueness into the sky. I don't mind the violet, and I probably have gone a bit of both. Also, somewhere there's almost a little, very subtle layer of cloud across there. If it happens, I'll keep some of that. If it doesn't, I'm not going to get too upset about it. But I would like to have a hint of maybe mountains, or just, we'll see. It's a fairly flat landscape, so we don't want to go hugely high, but at the same time, a little bit of something drawing us into that distance is not a bad way to go. So our first layer is going to be a little bit complicated, okay? So be aware that to watch the brush marks and the brush work that I do, how I hold my brush, what I'm doing with it, how much paint I'm picking up at any one time. It's so we're going to work with, I think we should be able to stop at perhaps where there's a colour change. It might be nicer if we kept on going, but I do understand the realities of it gets overwhelming, and you know we can go back in and continue in a second layer. So ultimately we'll have 3 layers. We'll do this sort of section first, we'll do this section second, and then we'll finish it off with the trees in the foreground. Okay, so we're looking for a bigger brush. I have already got some paint mixed up. So for the mountain area, I'm going to use something that's got a little bit of that in it, and I might even just include a little bit of blue into that as well. And also for that's the cerulean, this is a cobalt. So I don't mind actually having 2 of those colours working in my sky a little bit as well. So I've got a mix of almost greyish violet, a bit of cerulean and cobalt. So that's the plan. And like I said, we need a big brush. Might actually help if I do a bit of sketching first though. I'm good, but I don't think I'm quite that good. Or did I? I may not have, you know. But I at least want to mark where my horizon is going to be, just a little bit. So really there isn't going to be any sketching in this first layer. I'm going to give myself a suggestion of where those lines are. Definitely do not sketch in that cloud. It's always a bad idea trying to sketch clouds unless they're big storm clouds that you need to remember where the whites and the darks go. This is quite a subtle scene, so we need to work that way. And at most, my sketching would be seriously just that one line across there, and even then not quite full on. Practically nothing, just enough that I can see it. I know that you can't actually see it very much at all. But this is the fun of painting. And when we get to doing things in the foreground, we will do some sketching, minimally, of course. Okay, biggest brush that you might have, wetting up a little bit further than what's happening here. What we'll then do once we've finished that, and I don't mind if it's not too wet on that side where I'm going to leave that white cloud, whitish cloud. So my paper is mostly wet, down past the line where I wanted it to be. So I'm going to start with a bit of cerulean, I think. And just very gently, I'm actually not going to start at the top because I want to have it be soft and it's a bit of sweepiness here. I'm sure that's also a term. And I can guarantee you, whatever I did on the last one, I'll probably do a totally different something rather than this time. Ooh, that was a bit stronger than I anticipated. Let's just put some more water with that.
That's your cobalt?
This was cobalt, so a little bit of that. And I think that's probably enough there. I don't mind that extra. I might just get rid of those lines. Don't particularly want that. But I'm also going to introduce just a little bit of violet up into that sky straight away. So again, that it becomes... Now you can already see how this is moving down. I'm going to have to flip it back the other way because the extra water has made that flow. I might even take it off to the side. Okay, see, can you see how it's dissipating? Just by changing the aspect of your board, that's one of the good things about watercolour. You can direct your paper to an extent. There's just a white mark there that I don't particularly like. And I think that's mostly it. A little bit more on the horizon. Bringing down to a smaller brush because I want a little bit of detail here on the foreground as such. I'm just going to have some fun here. This is fun, just in case you didn't realise. And I will introduce, no, it's too far back to leave that. I think I'll take it out. And I might just straight away introduce a little bit of, oh, there's a bit of pink in that too somewhere. I like the pinkness that's happening at the back. And so I'm just going to introduce a bit of that straight away. It does depend on your photos sometimes whether you can, what colours you see in amongst it. And also it never hurts to have a bit of imagination regardless. And I think I'm just going to, I know I did continue when I did the first layer, but I don't want to at the moment. I'm going to just smooth that off. A little bit of roughness is fine. I won't, because I know what I want to do next will take a little bit of extra explanation. So a hint of colour. Make sure that this at the bottom is soft. Don't have any hard lines left back there, okay? That's about it. Now, I didn't end up with too much cloud, but oh well, it doesn't matter. That's it. All right, your turn. So we're back, and I'm just going to talk colour for a minute. And so our violets in particular, we're just going to work with a pinky violet. I might help if I see my reference too. Now, I don't want to go too blue, and that's what this is. It's just a little bit too blue, so a hint, please, please, a hint of pink. Better to have less and then go again than to, because if you pick up that, you know, if you've gone that, and you end up with way too much, and then you've got to decide what to do with it. This is fairly dry. I didn't even re-wet it tonight. But that's sort of, can you see the difference there? It's more of a pinky violet. So that's that one. And I'm also looking for we're going to go into raw umber for the foreground. Not quite that much. This is all very soft. And then I've got this pinky one again. So what I've done here is use my raw umber. I've got a little bit of pink on top of that. And of course my usual, whatever happens in that palette colour. So that way it goes a little bit grey without, oh, there we go. See, that works really well. So if you actually do that, it's easier if you push it all to the bottom. Now I'm doing that because my palette's on a lean. And if this is too pink or too something or other, just put a little bit of extra up into here. You don't have to rework the whole lot. Sometimes you end up with so much paint there. It's really hard just to work with, to change it up enough. And so if you're working with your palette and you've got a huge amount of something that you're mixing and it's not right, just do it in the corner and add in extra as you need it. I think I'm happy enough with those three colours. And that will do me for the moment. So we wanted this whole background area to be really soft. So what we don't want is any, or well, very few hard edges of any kind into this. One more thing, I knew there was something else I was missing. I need a small brush, and I also need some stronger paint. So what I'm going to do here is get a bit of blue and a bit of my pink, but I do need it to be not bright violet like that, and I'm going to put just a hint of that in there. Now I could actually just work with that down here quite easily so that it doesn't actually walk away or anything like that. It needs to be a bit stronger in colour so that I can work with that. And I probably will need to do the same here. That's quite strong. And it's also a bit too pink, so keep working it for a minute. And what I'm doing with this is these are going to be our little trees, and they have to be put in while what we're doing is still wet, because otherwise it just doesn't work the same. You don't get that distance that happens with those trees. Now I might change up the colour a bit as we go along, because I don't want them to be so pink, I suppose, but I'll play with that in a minute. So where we were using our biggest brushes before, that's not particularly big, I should actually have bigger ones, but I haven't got any here. I want to go down a size now for the next layer. So probably nothing bigger than a 12, and if you have a mop, you're still looking for the smaller ones now. Okay, now I've got some sort of horizon there. I'm actually going to wet up an area here above where I'm going to start painting. Now the reason is, as I said, I don't want anything that's too hard edged. So even here I'm going to just very gently, I don't mind if there is some white, some dry paper, but I just need to have that flow so that that comes. If you were doing it in one layer, you would actually have, it would be sorted out anyway, but at the moment we're working with a couple of layers. So I really almost wish I didn't put in that pencil mark, so I might just go a bit darker there. And coming in with a bit of darkish. It's quite subjective, you don't have to be, and I'll probably start using 2 or 3 or 4 brushes, just so that you know. Because I'll just play with that paint there now. So just a hint of some other layer of foliage, and coming back in here with my pinky one, that's not even what I wanted either. I'm going to grab mostly a soft, I want that yellow down straight away, that yellowish look, that foreground. So I've just diluted a little bit of the raw umber into a hint of that pink. So it doesn't need to be none of it needs to be heavy at this stage, and I'm still going to make sure that that bottom line is not going to cause a straight line. All right, so coming back into this area, it's now a little bit wet, nothing too strong, and it would be helpful if I had my right brush. And I'm just going to, again, give myself some layers of colour. It's not even about putting down exactly, I'm only looking at that as a suggestion. I'm thinking about that as something to do. And I'm also going to perhaps use a different colour, just a hint of cerulean into that. And of course, a hint of cerulean. Yes, that worked really well. But that's okay. And again, it's again to change it up as much as anything, but also to give different layers. All right, so the next thing is to get my small brush. The colour is, that's why it's nice to have this here. That's a bit, now we're getting somewhere. And I'm going to try that. I'll just put a little bit of water in there. And so what I'm going to do here is actually work with, it'll depend on how wet everything is. So this is going to be really about control of your water. So if you have it too wet, it's going to bleed everywhere and you won't be able to get these 2 trees. If you have your paint too washy, you won't get any strength of colour, which is what's happening here. But as soon as you get those ones right, we're almost just doing little blobs. And again, just be careful not to have all your ducks in a row either. We're painting little trees in the far background, not making a fence. And so some of them will be larger areas. And I finish them off often with just smallish bits and pieces here and there. If you've ended up with quite a strong blob, 2 ways to go. You can just soften it off. Again, different brush would be even better. you know, you can always just dab and get rid of a little bit of extra that way. So give yourself, again, different layers. So we don't want just one layer of trees all the way across. That's not how landscapes work. So, and I've left a little bit of white there. I'm going to not play with that just at the moment because it might work out that I'll work something different with that later. And I'm also going to come back in with just a hint of green so that a couple of these trees in the back, in the further forward, can be, so as we get forward, they're going to be slightly larger, they're going to be greener, and we can make them, oops, I might just do, oops, sorry. And I'll probably put a few in over here too, because I'm not quite sure how our foliage is going to go. If we end up with all this very dark foliage over here, it'll get covered over, so it's no big deal there. So I'm going to come back in with a bit of that pinky one just to change that up again. Quite frankly, that's probably as much as I need to do. I might just put little bits of something. Oops, I love fingers. Fingers are great brushes. I'm just looking for another layer back in here. It's already starting to dry, and so I don't want to go too much because, like I said, it's all going to end up softer. You know that your paper's dry when it goes back flat. But in the meantime, if it's still got a bit of a ripple, we haven't got the stretch paper, so that doesn't actually work that way. Probably just a hint of green on that one, not too much. See how that's already, can you see the difference of when I put it down before as to what's happening now? Not too big a deal, I'm not too worried. And what I'm going to do is put some extra colour in here straight away. And I'm not going to, because I want some foreground type stuff happening already. A little bit of that pinky one too while I'm at it. Need a bit more water. I just want to vary this up at the moment, and when we get to foregrounds, often it's best just to put some colour in and not play with it too much. It's a bit like the skies. The less you work your skies, the more natural they end up, within reason. So I'm just going to soften those off. And think I'm actually okay with that. A bit of water there, I'm just going to put a little bit. Oh, that's okay. Not quite sure what happened there, but I had that bit of that greeny one on there. But that's nice, I'm kind of happy with that. I look for different things happening. I don't want it to be all one layer. That's about it for the moment. So the main thing is to watch your water levels in this area. Put a little bit of water down to help the flow, but make sure that your paint is thick enough that it will blend without, but not dissipate. Okay, we'll go around. So we've covered the page. Usual story now is to stand back from your painting, have a look, see what it is you have and where you possibly need to make some adjustments. I like what's happening here in mine. I'm finding this area in here is a bit of a void, not really doing anything. And part of the reason for that is this stronger bit of colour here needs to be supported by something here, I think. And so I'm going to just add an extra tiny little layer of trees just there before we go on. If it's never a bad thing to have some sort of focal point even in amongst this area, because it's all about the background. And what I might also do is there's a hint that when I put that hint of cerulean in, I might just up the ante just here so that it perhaps even looks like a bit of a dam or a lake, or no, it wouldn't be a lake, just a dam of some kind, or even just a bit of water that's left over after a storm. I don't want to go overboard about it, but I think I could just afford to have that little bit of blue be just that bit stronger. Everything else there is going to happen as we go through. There's a hint of a mountain here with the stronger one in between. I can see where I want to put my other line of trees or make that a bit different. But I also think I might just darken. I've got a hint of something happening here. I might just do something in that area as well. I'm quite happy with the majority of it. We could go further with the trees type thing. I didn't leave myself as much foreground this time, so I'm not going to go any further forward with that, because I do still want to have those trees in the foreground there. So just to continue moving on, I'll just get this one up the road. So the idea is to actually make some adjustments to this area before you go on and work with the foreground, because you're going to cover up some of this with your trees in the foreground. If there was any adjustments needed to your sky, now is also the time to do that as well. So, a little bit. Now, still wanting all this very soft. So, again, I'm going to put some water down. Not as much this time. I just want to only where I'm going to put some extra paint. And I might come in with a bit of violet just in that area, just to strengthen that just a hint. Now, if you ended up with rough marks that you don't want at this stage, again, once they've gone down, a little bit of a water brush, and you can soften those off. A little bit of hard line here and there is okay, but I don't want to go too heavy with that. So just very, very gently, I'm going to put some extra little marks in the background here. I might just take that a little bit stronger. Okay. That's probably as much as I want to do at the moment, and a little bit of strength over here. Hopefully this will work. Now you can also see where I'm holding onto my brush so that it just skims the surface once again, and I'm just going to again soften those areas just that little bit. What I need to do is make sure that that top line is flat. If I have it rounded, it's going to look like a mountain. So that area there needs to be flat, and I can make it do a little bit of that just by bringing in a bit of that colour as well. Now I will check that out a bit later on once it's dry, and just see whether that actually did what I was hoping it did, which is just a hint of something a little bit different here. Okay, I don't think I'm actually going to change up anything too much else in here because I want to be able to play with my foreground anyway. Still, even after you've done the trees and everything, there's still adjustments. If you really need them, you can go back into this area. Okay, now this is where I will actually get my pencil back going again. Now, as I said, there is, now looking at this area here, it's a case of pick and choose. I might actually bring this tree here, but bring it up over to here. Now the reason is I want to really bring us into the distance. And so if I have this large tree here, it's like a stopper. It's like, all I can see is this tree. And the other thing I'm going to think about is just how with this foreground, this little area here is actually quite important. So if you have trees all the way across in this particular scenario, it won't be quite as interesting as if you have a little gap so that your eye follows it along and then moves through. It's very interesting how little that sort of thing can make a difference, how much that can make a difference. So looking at this tree, I kind of like that, but oh well, so be it. Or I could put the tree here, which would be fine. So I'm going to work just on having, I want to leave a little bit of foreground. That's just foreground. And so I'm going to start my tree line somewhere about there. That's the base of the trees. And very little happening over here. So, and remembering I don't want to go any further than probably here so that there's this entrance. Little ones here. The other fun part is actually trying to make this be interesting. Again, if you end up with your doing this, or it's all about this, and then you have it all about the same. So try and avoid that. You don't want all your trees to be on one level, but at the same time you just need a little bit of variation. A lot of this will come in with our brushes anyway, so don't be too worried, but at this stage I prefer to have a little bit of variation with what we're doing. And again, that's just your baseline. And I probably will have a bit of something happening up here. I might actually just go a little bit higher there, break that line so that I can see part of it. In fact, I don't like, I'm going to make use of that little gap there to bring up that tree so that there's something happening there, but I can still see what's going on behind it. And I want to make this tree here. So it'll only be a smallish tree. It won't be quite as large as what you see there. But I also it will have a tree trunk. And I'm just going to give it a bit of a suggestion there, and maybe I'll play with that one a bit later on. I don't really want to go too much more to that. And possibly, see, I'm looking at the background here. Where do I want a tree? Where can I cover it up? Where don't I want to cover it up? See, I like that, so I didn't want to cover that up. So I'm working with my own painting, at least to an extent. And so I might just actually bring that up a bit as well. So I'll see how that looks. Now, again, needing stronger paint. So I'm going to go back to working with various colours. So I want that type of strength of colour now. We've had all of this be nice and wishy-washy and soft and very distance. But now it's time to get some other colour happening. And I will bring in a little bit of green. We don't want to go too, no, way not that. So I might just bring in a bit of, no, actually I'm not going to introduce green because I like to keep my same colour scheme going. So what I'm going to do is grab that colour and the cerulean that I've got, and it's already changed up. If I needed that to be different, I've used the cobalt, and so cobalt and that one will also give myself a grayer mix as well. And I still do need, no, that's about it. And a little bit of that pinky one. We might end up with something a little bit pinky in there somewhere as well. Okay. All right, so the idea here is to start at one end, work your way across. Most of the time when we work with this, unless you're doing a large wash, it's a good idea to start with one area. And we're going to, so I'm going to grab, and this is the time to grab 2 colours on your brush. So I've started off with raw umber, and I've also just put some cobalt on it as well. And look what happens. So I had this lovely greyish colour. Now I'm going to bring in a bit more blue at the bottom. And moving across to the next bit, I'm just going to come back in with some pure raw umber. I'm not going to rush this. It takes a little bit of time. I want a hint of pinky sort of stuff happening there as well. Changing it up. Now that tree trunk is white. There's 2 different ways to go. I could leave the white tree trunk, or I could play with it later and find it again. I'm going to play with it later. So already you can see how there's variation within that area. Look, I'll be guided by that marginally, but I'm not going to be dictated to it. More, I'm going to just make sure that I've got this line being very interesting. And then there's some variation within that as well. So a little bit of the cerulean this time with that raw umber. I need more cerulean that time. So again, different colour trees. Also, last thing is to watch this last line here. You don't want that to be all a straight line. So as you get to the bottom, you get to, you just run your brush across, make some variation there. I kind of like having more than one brush on the go. And this is one time where I'm planning on, I mostly will be using it on its side. And the reason is to get those lovely broken marks on the edges. Another way to go is to actually use it that way. And then come back in with a bit of other paint, with whatever it might be, in places. I'm going to come back in with a bit more of the cobalt and make some of that darker. And where I need that before it gets too dry. I don't like this area here, so I'm just going to come back in there. Now, not all of the dark has to be on the bottom, because often that sort of thing does happen. Just need to change up that shape, and I want a bit more bright stuff happening there as well. Either that or it had to be darker, which I might still do. So just making sure that some of this is, I forgot about this last little bit. Let me just do that. It can just about fade out to nothing. And I need a little bit more of that pink. I like that hint of pink over there. So let's see if I can get a bit of it back in here. And most of all, I need just suggestions of more dark in there. So just occasionally. So this is just thicker paint. Maybe the tree goes behind, the dark go behind some of that. A little bit more variation just there. And even with the darks, you can see how I'm trying to think always bush. It's all about it being a bush. And so that's pretty much where I'm at. Okay, this one here, same sort of colour scheme. But because, again, we've got that gum tree look, I'm just going to do my usual. I think we were doing some of this the first or second lessons, where it becomes... And I still have two colours on my brush. And a little bit of that, bit of variation. I can quite easily just leave that looks good, I like that. I might, now I have the option of actually doing light or dark tree trunks. I think what I'm going to do is have light coming through here and then darker once I do that. And there's no reason why I shouldn't do a bit of a darker tree trunk now. Now I did draw something, but I'll probably just ignore it. And I didn't even get my rigger out, that'd be right. So I'm just going to looking at where I've got some foliage and where these branches might actually work. And I can still play with some of that later. And I'm going to probably leave, oh no, I might just do a little bit of something else here. Or should I have a look at it first? Yes, I should. You would usually regret it if I didn't. I think I'm going to leave it there for the moment. I might just still do a little bit of colour just in there, but I'm not going to really do anything too much. And I think what I'm going to do right now is muck up my foreground straight away. Just a little bit of something, and I want to play with this area quickly without having too much stuff. A little bit of something happening there, and what I'm doing is again, if I go too much with this, I know I'm going to regret it. So just enough to play with, to give it a bit of extra texture, but for the moment that'll do me. Okay, your turn. This one does bother me just a little bit even now.
It does.
And I think it's because part of it is because it is in the middle.
That's a bit solid.
Yeah, and it's a bit solid, and it's perhaps just one colour.
Yes.
So if we can blend it in, maybe coming in even on this side with a bit of that yellow, perhaps. So maybe a bit smaller. It doesn't have to be. It's about changing that area shape up.
Yeah.
And so that it becomes something different. What you're doing here is really nice. Yeah, there's little trees on the hill. That looks good. But I think it also comes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one can be done now.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't go too much further until you've stood back from it to see what's going on. Okay. Now, again, this is the time we've done pretty much all the main elements on this painting. So now it's a time to reevaluate again and decide whether there's something else that needs to happen. So working with my own painting, I'm going to say I like the fact that this is quite distant. But again, I think I'm still feeling a little bit of a void in here somewhere. So rather than actually paint any trees or anything like that, I'm just going to put a little bit of a mark there. Just a horizontal mark, because we're looking at distance, and I do like working with my brush flat against the page. And again, still if I need a bit of softness there, now that I've got that harder line, I can just soften it in. And same thing here, I just need something happening there as well. Do like that. I think it can almost be just a little bit brighter still. I don't want to... Just a little hint of something even brighter without it. See what happens. Right. That's okay, that's okay. I kind of like my sky this time. It's got a bit of interest, and it's something there. Oh, I've got pen. Never mind. Won't matter. It's been known to happen. It's interesting how quickly you can change up an area just by putting some paint in. I find this is a little bit bland here as well. And so this time I'm going to put, not blue, I wasn't planning on doing that, just a hint of water down first, because you can do it either way. It's not that big a deal. And this way I know I'll get some softer marks. And I just want something to bring through there. I often work with a water brush in my hand. Do something, if I don't like it exactly, I'll put a bit of water on it. Or using my fingers. Also works for a treat. Let me just put a little bit of something suggestive of trees just there as well. Don't like that bit. Okay. Next thing, I don't know what these dots are. Not a clue how that happened. No, I think I'm going to have to take that off. Whatever that is, it doesn't work. That will be easy to change though. Just need a little bit of something there. Quite a light area just there, so I'm going to again wet that bit up and just put a bit of colour there. Doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to work with what was there already. And same thing, I'm just going to soften that bit of blue off there. That should work. Again, I think I'm going to bring in another little branch that's sort of hanging down. Entirely optional. And so maybe that one there is actually a little branch that's hanging down a little bit further. And that way I can put a little bit of foliage there as well. That time it was turned out to be a little bit more violet, but that's okay. I don't want it to be totally spelled out anyway. Alright, I'm not quite sure whether that worked, I'll find out later. Last thing, I'm happy with that, pretty much, except for this funny little mark just there. So just again change that up. In fact, I think I'll just get rid of that bit. And I didn't like that particular area either. So again, only needs a little bit of adjustment to hopefully make that read better. Now the last thing is a bit of foreground, something a bit more interesting. Just going to darken a little bit under here. Pushing that back a bit, hopefully, or making it changed up anyway. And I'm actually too close to this to see it properly, but I'll work with that, that'll be fine. So when I talk about mucking up your foreground, often what I'm talking about is a bit of water down and just do a sweep or two. Don't go dot, 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 dot. Okay, I'm sure that's a technical term.
I'm sure I've Googled that somewhere.
So, a little bit of grassy sort of stuff perhaps, just to finish it off. And I don't want it to be lots and lots of glass. So just bushes go round, grass goes up and down, sort of, maybe a little bit. But again, even here, different areas, different layers, and there still needs to be a little bit of something a bit darker underneath. Here and there. Even here, a little bit less in the background. And I don't want it to be huge. I'm going to grab that and make this corner here just a little bit darker. My brush is too small. Just sweeping my brush across, and it gives me some texture there. Maybe just push a bit of it up. I don't actually want to limit what's happening here though. And quite frankly, I could probably be happy with that for the moment. I would actually turn around and have another look at it and still make adjustments as I need to. So yeah, so at the moment I'm going to leave it like that. I will do that off camera, but I can just take all that off and officially it's done. So there we go. Okay.
There are undulations.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I was really after, that type of thing where it draws you in. And there's just some variation. Doesn't have to be huge, but at the same time, I just want it to have that depth. And so these little trees down the back here make a huge difference. Set against these darker and much bigger ones at the front. And that gives the height that's necessary to, again, give you a reason to look down. There's probably plenty of things that I could do. But anyway, Melissa has agreed for me to give her some insight into this one. Now, she's going really well with this. This is lovely. I love that mountain at the background. It's just sort of sits there beautifully. There's a little bit of interesting sort of things happening here, but it doesn't quite read right. So we do need to probably bring a little bit of the yellow perhaps in here. In fact, that could actually be another little layer, mini layer. And then because with that, there was a bit of water put in there. It was too dark at the first place, and it was still just a little bit wet when Melissa put another layer of water in. And that sort of pushed the paint, and it formed almost a cauliflower, but not quite. And so I think if you go in a little bit different, put in another layer of hill there, if you want to put it that way. These ones here need to be resolved. At the moment, they're almost like they're floating. So it needs a little bit of something, and it's probably like I was doing with this, where really all that's necessary is a mark that just does something like that. A broken mark underneath part of this, maybe bringing joining that section here to here. And probably a little bit of that as well. So maybe just a bit of broken mark here that will base those trees out a little bit. Again, not totally convinced about those ones. What you could do is make that be more of a grassy hill, a treed hill, by perhaps doing a bit of this type of thing. So, and it sort of will, and it was, it'd be much bluer than that. But if you just bring that in and have that sit at the background, and wherever you need to, just soften off. And so that will give you that, bring that back in and make it again. We're looking, the layers that are there aren't quite making as much sense as they need to. So this one here again, I love what you're doing. I love this area, by the way. I really do love the way you put that in. But there's, again, that one can be back, but we need something happening here in front to push it back. Again, it doesn't quite, because mountains always have these layers. And even if they're in mountains and hills, they're overlapping each other. And that's something you've got to remember. It's not always in straight lines. Because even this area that's really flat, because it's in the distance, you get away with that. But in reality, there's different layers that are overlapping. And so I would bring that darker bit there, with perhaps a little extra of that, just sort of through here and through here, bringing it through, and then just mucking up, bringing some layers, some texture, like you have sort of here, but on a lesser plane. The trees here, these are working quite nicely. That one there could also have a little bit of something happening here, so that it's a lost and found type of thing. Yeah. Part of the tree trunk is got bush over it, but just down here you get to see a bit more of it. These are two separate. Yeah. So I would be inclined to bring some of that colour in to this area a little bit. And you could almost have another bush coming in over front of it that's darker. So it would just, so probably that sort of shape, or even back up into there. Little things like that though, don't lose them if you can avoid it. Surprising how again, a bit of variety, a little bit of dark, that sort of blue coming across that one. This is all working quite nicely. We were having a bit of a struggle with here, and I think we could still manage to change that up a little bit. I think once you've got some texture into here, you'll know better where to change that up as well. And just a little bit of grass there, and I think you're a done deal. Sweet. Very nice. Anybody?
Quite a lovely scene to work with that would have universal appeal. Layers of wet and wet technique have given opportunities to explore how much water and paint to have mixed in your palette and on your brushes as you put them to the paper. Even now though, we have used many of the pigments individually straight on the page and not combined on the palette. This method of painting allows the colours to mix and merge seamlessly and give an abundance of beautiful variance. Then came the alla prima brushwork to produce bushes so that they became a unit, not a series of single items lined up at the front. This allowed lost and found edges to occur within the areas of light and dark tones. Attention to the silhouette edges were important so that this still became an interesting and natural area.